Well, welcome back, everybody, to Between Two Sermons. So great to have you here with us on this frigid edition. Once again, Pete, welcome with us back here to the seat, to the interviewee seat on Between Two Sermons. It's great. I feel like we're having some throwbacks now, just back in the day, being mic to mic. So this is great. This is a great experience.
Somebody came up to me last week and they said, Between Two Sermons? Is that like a knockoff of Between Two Ferns? And I go, I think it is.
It is, yeah. So anyway, hey, we're just letting you in behind the scenes here a little bit. But thanks so much for the great sermon this week, Pete. We went through, as we've been working our way through Ephesians, we're Ephesians 3 now, and you talked about 1 through 13 was the passage that you talked about. And I want to talk about, as we begin, the 3 words that you highlighted in the very beginning, which were grace, revelation, and mystery. And you highlighted those because those are repeated in the passage. And those, whenever we see words repeated in a passage, those are things we want to pay attention to as we're studying it. So could you break those 3 down again for people, even in the midst of how you were studying them, what they came to mean to you, those 3 individual words, as you studied the passage? What did those three mean?
I'm going to define that. I do want to back up a little bit.
Yeah.
And because I think this is helpful. Ephesians 3, 1 to 13 is the Rocky 2 of the book of Ephesians.
Okay.
So I actually think Rocky 2 is the most underrated. And whether you've seen all the Rockies, we won't talk about Rocky 5. But Rocky 2 doesn't have Mr. T like Rocky 3 or even Drago like Rocky 4. But it's so essential to the story because Rocky is dealing with, am I going to get a regular job or be a boxer?
Right.
And I think that that's what Paul is doing here is he's walking in and he's like, my life has been so changed. And actually, I think the Ephesian church was more interested in 1 through 13 than the rest of the book, because that was the immediate question that they're dealing with prison.
Oh, well, tell me more about that, actually, because I'm curious. You saying that statement makes me curious. Why do you feel like the Ephesian church was more interested in that?
Well, he starts in verse 1 and he says, for this reason, I, Paul, a prisoner. And then he ends the passage with I'm suffering for your sake. So, I think one of the key aspects of this passage, think about if you or me were in prison and we wrote a letter. We're curious of what's your interpretation of that. And what Paul is even saying in this section of the letter is he goes, I'm not in prison because I missed God's will. I'm in prison because I've done God's will. And so that's why those 3 words are important. We will answer that question, but I want to set the stage for our small groups and our listeners. And, I think Paul is answering a big question that the Ephesians are asking.
Yeah. And that question primarily being, if you're doing God's will, can it lead to suffering? Or can it lead to results that you don't anticipate being the best results? And so that's what they're struggling with, and that's why it may have been so meaningful to them.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the most personal side with Paul. So coming back to your original question, thanks for letting me go on that tangent. You think about grace.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before. Grace is not just from, grace from the wrong things or the bad things, but it's a grace for.
Yeah.
Dallas Willard said it this way: grace isn't opposed to effort, it's opposed to earning.
Right.
And so what Paul is saying, as an administrator of God's grace, as a steward of God's grace, and he's looking at his life and he's saying, I've been given this powerful grace from God that I'm even here right now serving Gentiles who I'd never thought I would. And then you go to the word mystery, and John Stott defines it, a truth to be initiated into. I've also called it an open secret, but the reason why I think a truth initiated into is powerful is because Paul defines the mystery. He says, hey, the Gentiles are joint heirs with Israel. So he's saying what God did in the Old Testament is carrying over to the New Testament. And then the word revelation, I think in the early part of the passage, when Paul's talking about that, most commentators think he's talking about his testimony. He's talking about how he was once so far from God, trying to thwart the church, thwart Christians. But the revelation was God literally pushes him off his horse, blinds him in Damascus. And now, years later, he's living out the gospel and he's sharing to Gentiles. And as a Jewish person, if you told Paul pre-Damascus Road, this is what you're going to give your life to, that's like the hugest mystery.
Right.
And so I think he's very specific in this passage, but I also think the mystery has such a bigger deal to deal with, how Jesus even came as a baby, died on a cross and rose again. And he's talking even about his life. Like, the mystery is so deep.
Yeah. So maybe even as I think about where you led us in those first few verses of the passage, those three words are really related to Paul's testimony. Maybe even the three words that could sum up his testimony in many ways. What do you think about that? I mean, as I say that.
Well, it's interesting. Our producer, Nathan, and I were talking as we walked over here, and some people might not know what a testimony is. Testimony is just simply the story of how God brought you to him. So I think about three questions. What was my life like before I met Jesus? How did Jesus change my life? And then, what's changed my life now? So it's, how did I come to know Jesus? How has that changed me now? And you and I probably don't have these huge testimonies, but that's the power of God. I didn't choose the home that I was born in. I didn't choose the church I grew up in, but here I am following Jesus, and you begin to look at that. And I think Paul, you can go to Philippians, and he said, I was a Jew of all Jews. Like, he knew the Torah, he knew God's word, and it wasn't all bad, but he went from judgmental and angry to willingly giving his life for the church.
Yeah.
That only happens through Jesus.
Right.
You and I being here, even though we don't have a Paul testimony, it's Jesus.
Yeah.
There's probably times in your life where you said, is this worth it?
Yeah, many times. Yeah.
And so I think, even kind of going back to your larger point with testimony and story and suffering, it's not like we come to Jesus and everything is sunshine and roses. It's hard, but there's a grace that sustains. It's not just a grace from back there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And maybe those three words could be true of each of our stories. If we have come to know Jesus, there is a sense of grace. Mercy is not getting what we deserve. Grace is getting more than we deserve. There's a sense of grace. There's a sense of mystery. How in the world did God bless me? This is not anything that I did on my own. How in the world did I receive this gift? And then this revelation that we get to experience because of that. And it's not just a one-time revelation, it's an ongoing revelation of God's work in our lives too, that he continues to reveal stuff to us as we walk along.
Well, and in this passage, Paul says, I'm the least of all the apostles. And I think we read that as self-deprecation or gratuitous. I think he actually meant it. I think he actually meant, not in a way to look at him, but hey, look at what God has done. And I wonder if the apostle Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times, I'm the least of all the apostles. You wonder with Thomas, who doubted God. Like, I think there was something more powerful. It wasn't just the self-deprecation. It was, no, I've experienced the gospel of God, and I realize I bring very little to the table, but look at what God has done.
Yeah, and that brings us really to the second half of the passage, which is how that works out in our lives. Ministry, and you did a good job of explaining to us that ministry isn't simply a vocation in terms of, hey, I get paid for this, I don't get paid for this. You and I are both pastors, but ministry is not for one exclusive class of people who are, a little more righteous than everybody else.
We're not righteous.
We are not. If you hung out with us long enough, you would understand that. But ministry is for each of us as believers. We're all called to a form of ministry. How do you think people can apply that concept to their lives, that concept of ministry for all of us?
Yeah, I totally want to bring you all behind the scenes. So like we record this after a practice message on Thursday, and Cody said something interesting. He's like, Peter, be more specific. So however God leads on Sunday. But, I think about the mom that feels like she can barely make it, just with her family and trying to hold everything up. Even the dad, the mom and dad of young kids, you might not have time to do stuff at church right now, but your ministry is your kids, praying with them, reading the Bible, making sure that they're alive. Like, I've got, 2 kids under 10 right now. You've got 2 kids in college ages. And so I think it changes. And, I also think about the empty nester that, you're in your 50s and you're asking the question, what's God called me to do? Is there an opportunity? Are you going to, join and volunteer with one of our partners? Or is there someone you work with that they keep knocking on your door and asking you to spend time with them? And again, the simple definition from Henry Cloud, how do you leave people better than how you found them? And one of the reasons why I want to harp on this is we sometimes think ministry is this huge thing. We're going to start a nonprofit or we're going to start something in the church. Here's the deal. I think when we get to heaven, we're going to find out that the greeter on Sunday morning made as much of an eternal difference as the pastor preaching or, all the, like, we want to rate these things, but it's those little acts, like the meaningful ministry that I do, most people don't see. And I think that you spend time with a pastor, a small group leader, all of a sudden you start to realize, like, it's the one-on-ones, it's the mentoring, it's the investing, it's the hospitality of having someone over at your house. Those actually cost us more than we think, but those are the things that make the biggest difference.
Right. Yeah, I think that can't go overstated. I think sometimes there's this idea, I think, on the part of people that, pastors must have this otherworldly life and they must have this ability to like be in ministry, must be this glamorous thing. I mean, maybe not you were thinking that, but I did as much ministry serving in my corporate life when I did that for 10 years. Because I was just able to be in people's lives day in and day out that didn't know Jesus. And I was able to talk with them day in and day out, and sometimes in unique circumstances that was really cool to be a part of as I look back on it. Not that I don't cherish this moment, but those moments were equally powerful. So I think for people to realize they have a unique opportunity no matter where God's placed them.
I'm so glad you brought that up because there's a lot of people at Browncroft that are probably mid-level managers, C-suite managers, and take this figuratively, your church is your office. When you go in there, and are you leaving the people that you're leading and managing, even the people that are your bosses, are you leaving them better than how you found them? Now, we still keep boundaries. Henry Cloud wrote the book on boundaries, and it's not saying to be a doormat, but it is kind of saying there's this higher calling that God has. Do your job well. If you're an engineer, your ministry is to make sure that you build bridges that are safe, that you're loving your neighbor. But there's also a sense that God has put all these people in your life to love and to care for. And it's the annoying cliche. I don't like it, but we got to use it. Some of those individuals, that's the only Bible that they're ever going to read is the way that you live out your Christian faith.
Yeah, love that. Well, thanks for walking us through this passage, Pete. Really, really encouraging as well as challenging, I think, for all of us. And I think as we sit back here and think about, hey, what could we discuss together as a small group or meditate on your own? A couple of things come to mind. Number one, how has God worked in your life? What's your story? What is the story of God's grace in your life? How did he reveal himself to you, if he has? Maybe you're just someone who's on the beginning of that journey. Just take a moment to consider that, reflect on it, maybe share that with others. And then consider, where might God be asking me to minister in this stage of my life? That could be at your school, that could be at your job, that could be with your kids. And get the opinions of other people, especially if you're doing this in the context of your small group. Get the opinions of other people around you. Allow them to speak into your life too, because that's where some of the real magic happens. So thanks, Pete. So grateful for you. And we'll see you all back here next time on Between Two Sermons.